I'm Kat Oriel, a reporter with Forbes. Today I'm joined by my colleague Marisa Dellatto. Marisa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Kat.
So last night's Met Gala had a theme which was honoring the late designer Karl Lagerfeld, one of the most iconic fashion creative directors. He was a bit controversial as well though. So what were your thoughts when you first heard about the theme?
I mean, I wasn't surprised. Like the day he passed away, I was like, oh, they're gonna do a Met Gala for him. Like I just assumed obviously they had that they have a few planned in the works. So I knew this was coming. It really wasn't a shock to me. And yes, he, has made very controversial statements, but him and the fashion world were just so entwined, especially, I mean, he had such a close relationship with Anna Wintour. So I really didn't expect them to like use any of his controversies that wouldn't be reason against having a Met Gala honoring him. It didn't surprise me.
How did last night's outfits live up to your expectations and what you thought when you think of Karl Lagerfeld? Like, do you think that the outfits last night were there to honor his legacy and actually lived up to those expectations?
I think they really did. Carl had such a long spanning career, obviously with Chanel and also Fendi and Chloe. So there was so much to pull from, both in the looks he designed, in archival pieces, in his general aesthetic, in things he liked. Obviously, we have a few people emulating his cat Choupette. All of the embroidery, the beading, the black and white, the muted color tones, the tweed and the texture, all of that was expected. That's classic Carl. And that's quite literally what everyone did. There wasn't a ton of variety. Everyone really focused on this very Carl driven specific aesthetic. Which was both good because everyone went with the theme. It was also a little monotonous, a little plain. Not many people took his essence and then brought it over to apply to themselves, which is usually what I look forward to, and seeing how people apply the theme in an original way.
Felt like a lot of the outfits definitely were playing it safe. And it's funny that you mentioned his cat, Choupette, because even though she was not there herself, which many people thought, maybe she would make an attendance, there were some outfits emulating her image, which was very funny. And another thing that I had heard a lot about leading up to the event was maybe the Kardashians weren't going to show up and that they'd been snubbed from the guest list, and ultimately they were there. Do you think that the Met in some way, though, was trying to avoid some of the controversies it has faced in years past? And, that was sort of the reason why they kept the theme and a lot of people's outfits were able to, be played safe.
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversation in the past 5 years. Are they following the theme? And in that time frame, we've had four Met Galas, and they were all very abstract ideological themes. America in fashion, camp. These very, they weren't tangible. Whereas Carl, literally, you have decades of, like I said, his designs, archival pieces, literally stuff that exists that you can pull from, which I think made it a lot easier to follow the theme. I will say, however, the theme was not taken as seriously in 2017 when Rei Kawakubo, the lead designer of Comme des Garçons, was being honored as the theme. She's a much more avant-garde designer than Carl, and very few celebrities took to her odd shapes and interesting aesthetic. While it's very easy to look beautiful in a Carl design, and that's why I think so many people took to it so easy, compared to Ray in the past, and also when you've had these more abstract ideas.
Do you think that the outfits would have lived up to his expectations?
I think so. I think they were fun. I think they were totally, like I said, his aesthetic, both in his designs and in what we think of him wearing. I will say there wasn't a lot of color variety, which obviously when we think of Carl, we think of him in the black and white and the collars. There was silver and gold, and there was, light pink, and there was some people like Kylie Jenner and Pedro Pascal in like fire engine red. And really, I feel like only Ariana DeBose stepped out from that and was in this beautiful like chartreuse and fur look, and I just loved it. And I wish, I think he had a lot more variety in what he created than what was presented, I still think everyone was right on the nose.
Yeah, and so let's talk more specifically about specific people's outfits. Who was your favorite?
I mean, one of my favorites was Lil Nas X, who showed up in his full body, painted and bejeweled and in a thong from Dior, and that's it. And I thought that was a great example of someone taking the aesthetic of Karl, that bejeweled beading that was very consistent in his designs, but applying it to themselves, thinking, how can I move this forward? How can I fit this to me? And make it really an event instead of just putting on an outfit. And I really loved that. Even though it was a little, it definitely was not the norm. I thought Russell Westbrook in his ballet flats and his jacket and pants, oh my God, I thought that was so on the nose. And it was one of the best looks overall of the night. Obviously, we had Rihanna in Valentino, in her beautiful white. I thought so many people just really were stunning. I loved Rachel Brosnahan, very sheer, with her breasts exposed, but still very classic. I really loved it. And I think one of the other things we got to see last night were so many pregnancy reveals with Serena Williams and Karlie Kloss, which was so fun. I think the Met is a great place to do something like that because you have this new shape to your body. It's a great way to explore that, accessorize it. Ki Hui Kwan was probably my favorite Karl, doing what he wore. I thought a lot of it was really fantastic. I loved Doja Cat's cat face. I thought that was the best cat of the night. It wasn't too much like Jared Leto's full cat suit. I thought Doja was perfect.
I think that's really interesting that you actually enjoyed the cat outfits, because I think those were probably a little more controversial, of people thinking that it was a little too much. But it's interesting to hear your perspective of how it kind of honored Karl.
Doja took that sleekness, those lines of the cat, did that to her outfit really well. Her outfit was very Karl. It was silver, it was bejeweled, it was feathers, the prosthetic of the nose. I think that really helped make it about the aesthetic of the cat rather than like, I'm dressed like a cat, even though she was meowing on the red carpet, but that's Doja being Doja. Whereas Jared Leto was just in a cat costume, and that's ridiculous. And then obviously he took it off, within minutes, and had a more caped look, which is something he's worn like time and time again to the Met. That I didn't love, but I thought Doja's was something, again, really something only she could pull off, and made it, she's a zany, wild person. She applied the theme to herself like Lil Nas X did. So I thought it was phenomenal. I thought that was a risk that was well taken.
And lastly, I wanted to ask you about a notable absence that we saw on the red carpet. There were not really any high-profile national politicians that we saw. In recent years, we've seen people such as AOC come out in very bold outfits. Her Tax the Rich dress actually landed her in a bit of hot water. Do you think that the lack of politicians was, people were missing that, or is it probably better that politicians sit this out, and that's probably going to become the norm in the years to come?
I don't think it's anything that, like, from a fan perspective that we were missing. Obviously, this is a fundraiser for the Met Museum that's been held for decades. It happens in New York. It's one of the biggest events in the city. I think it's natural for politicians who have connections to New York to show up. That's something that's been happening for decades before AOC got in any trouble for it, as that she obviously suffered that controversy because of it. And I think that's definitely going to make politicians more weary of showing up. I believe New York City Mayor Eric Adams said he was invited but had to miss it for, I forget what his excuse is, but I'm sure that excuse was simply, it's easier for me not to go than to go and mess up what I'm doing there.
And is there anything you hope to see at the next year's Met Gala?
No, I just hope next year is going to be a totally different aesthetic. Like I said, this year was very monotonous. It was beautiful and lovely, but it was easy, and everything looked kind of the same. And I like seeing the very different looks. So I hope that that comes back next year, but we'll see.
Marisa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Kat.